Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship. I'm Scott Stirrett, founder and CEO of Venture for Canada, and your host. The focus of this podcast is to hear from changemakers and Canadian entrepreneurs to learn about how they've developed their entrepreneurial mindset and skills. In season 4, we'll be chatting with CEOs, founders, and successful business leaders about their career journeys. I'm excited to dive into these conversations about how to foster your entrepreneurial mindset and drive. Heather Payne is a Toronto-based entrepreneur with over 10 years of experience creating organizations designed to help people achieve their full potential, with a special focus on the tech industry and those underrepresented in it. In 2011, she founded Ladies Learning Code, now known as Canada Learning Code. And in 2012, she founded Juno College of Technology, an innovative technology school that helps beginners transition to in-demand roles in tech, which she continues to run today as CEO. Serving over 1,500 students a year in downtown Toronto, as well as live online, Juno's alumni community is nearing 10,000 people. How are you doing this morning, Heather?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
It was fascinating doing research on you, Heather, kind of in advance of the interview. In your relatively sort of short career, you've made a huge impact in creating two very large organizations having a huge impact in Canada. And in going through your LinkedIn, one of the things I found that was the most interesting is that you put that when you were in high school, you worked at McDonald's, which a lot of people work in service roles, but they don't necessarily put that on their LinkedIn. And I think that it's a shame because there's actually a ton of learning that people get from these roles. So my question to you is that what were some of your key learnings from what was probably one of your first jobs, which was working in McDonald's while a high school student?
Yeah, McDonald's was my first job, and I chose it because my parents actually both worked at McDonald's, and it's how they met when they were 16. So there's sort of this like long-standing affection for McDonald's in my family. So the day I turned 15, I applied to my local McDonald's, got the job. And that was a transformational experience for me. I worked there for 5 years, I believe, in the end, all through high school, and even I think for one, Christmas break while I was in university or something like that. And it was a cool opportunity because, first of all, you got to meet all these different people from all different schools, different ages, totally different backgrounds. So that was neat because up until then, if you're, a high school kid, you've kind of spent most of your time with other kids similar age to you. So I thought that was neat. I ended up getting, promoted to manager after about a year. And so at 16, I'm now managing this McDonald's, a couple days a week or whatever. And that was so interesting. Those were some of my earliest leadership lessons. I can think back to, there was one, there were many people there that intimidated me. They're older than me and cooler than me or whatever. And I can think back to one time when I was intimidated by this, older high school aged young woman who worked there. And she came in and I was a manager and I didn't say hi to her because I was intimidated by her. And my manager pulled me outside of the restaurant right away and said, "Hey, why didn't you say hi to, blank and blank?" And I said, "Oh, I just, I didn't think of it." And he was like, "You're a manager, you're a leader, you say hi to everybody." And that stuck with me my whole life and whole career. And I think a big reason for, Juno has a really deep, welcoming culture. I think that comes right from the top. And it came from that exact lesson from my manager back then.
If a leader of an organization doesn't say hello to somebody, the leader might not remember it, a couple hours later, but that can stick with that person who's not said hello to for the entire day. It's amazing. I think it's really important. Leaders are intentional about even very little things, little cues, little things like saying hello can have a huge impact. What time management lessons did you learn from that experience of having to juggle, in essence, really almost a full-time job while taking high school classes at the same time?
I think the reason I worked so much was one, I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun and interesting and challenging and, trying, especially once you become a manager, you have sales targets each hour that you're trying to hit. And so I was very motivated by all of that. I also, I think my parents did a good job. They kind of set up a rule for me that 50% of my paycheck would go into my bank account. And so I would have like 50% to, do teenager stuff with, and 50% was being saved basically for university. And I started getting really motivated seeing the number in my bank account go up. And I was able to use that money, to be able to go on exchange and, travel and things like that. So that was awesome. And that was really motivating. But the reason I was able to work so much really was I joined the IB program, which is a high school program. It's actually an international program where, how I describe it is you are graded on a bell curve along with everybody else in the world. So it's sort of interesting because you get to see where you really stand. But the feature of it that made it work really well for me was that there was no real like homework or grades or projects during the year. 70% of your grade was the final exam. And you don't even do that final exam until grade 12, and you've been learning this material since the beginning of grade 11. So I didn't have homework to do necessarily. I didn't have things that were due. And so I basically just, went to classes, like tried to absorb as much as I could, and crammed before the exams. Like it was very stressful for a few weeks and months before the exams, absolutely crammed, did well enough. And then I sort of looked back and thought like, great, well, I got good grades and I was able to have this job and have this leadership role in my resume. And people love seeing McDonald's on a resume. It says something, I think, still today, if you're able to work at McDonald's for a long time. And not only that, it was fun. I loved it. Like, why would I spend all this time doing homework if I could instead get this great real world life experience? So I have absolutely no regrets about how I spent my time.
What were some of your main lessons from that time?
I have different lessons that I remember from over the years, but I don't remember being taught a lot of management at that time. So other than like, a few key lessons here and there, I don't think it was a big part of how managers were trained. But we definitely in our store had, high expectations for people. Like it came from the top. It was like very, cleanliness was very important. Like organization was very important. If you have time to lean, you have time to clean, like these kinds of things. And so I really bought into that culture. And I was definitely like a lead by example kind of manager back then for sure. And I think still am today. So, people would see me like busting my butt, between busy rushes, like getting things going. And I think that definitely inspires other people to do the same. And then I also learned a bit about the importance of keeping people accountable. They have some kind of system at McDonald's where you kind of do an analysis of your team members every so often. And it's like, appearance, like, are they, neat and tidy and like, these kinds of things. And so we regularly had to assess our, fellow team members or the people on the team, and then share with them like what you thought of their performance that day. And, it was hard to do that because I was, like I said, sort of a kid, and it felt uncomfortable to be like assessing other people. But I also learned that if you, keep people accountable and you do everything in a kind way with compassion, you really can, help people to improve and make them motivated to improve. So that was something I kind of had to do. And it might be where I learned, I'm like a very direct person, for better or for worse. There's good things and bad things about that approach. And maybe that's where I learned it, because I just got thrown into being direct with other people, that it sort of just became part of who I am.
I think the experience of working in McDonald's or other kind of service industry jobs at a young age is phenomenal. And I think if I ever had kids, I did not work in those kind of jobs when I was that age. And now that I'm, in my early 30s, and as I think about potentially having my own kids one day, I think I would definitely want them to spend some time. I think everybody should work in a job, a service industry job at some point, be it a waiter or working fast food or in retail, because I think the learnings will carry on in many different ways far later on in life. So today you're the founder and CEO of the Juno College of Technology, which is an outcomes-focused college that helps Canadians build a fulfilling career in tech. Juno is the first school in Canada to launch income share agreements. So one of the things I'd love for you to describe for our listeners, Heather, is what is an income share agreement and how does it differ from traditional tuition?
Income share agreements are pretty new in terms of being popularized, but they've actually been around for a very long time. The idea is that, somebody could pay nothing today, come to Juno, get trained, and then only once they start making money in their new career do they start paying Juno back for their tuition that they didn't pay at the time. So it's a really accessible way of getting people to be able to do these career changes, because you don't actually need to have, $10,000 in your bank account or whatever it may be. If you have the grit and perseverance and, the school believes in you, then we can let you in and we can say, hey, come here and learn and pay us back later. So that's what we introduced in 2019. We allow people to pay as little as $1 upfront for their tuition, but you can actually pay sort of any amount upfront. And then once you're in a job making $50,000 a year or more, you start paying back Juno at 17% of your gross monthly income. So say you're making 60 grand a year, 5 grand a month, you would pay Juno 17% of that until you hit a maximum. And that maximum is set at 1.5 times the tuition that you didn't pay back then. So you do end up paying more for the chance to kind of defer your tuition, but it's very appealing for some people because they either, maybe don't have access to the funds to be able to pay upfront. And also some people are more risk averse. And so the idea here that you don't actually have to pay until the school does what they said they're going to do is very appealing for more risk averse students.
And there are many benefits of income share agreements. I also think in terms of aligning incentives between educational institutions and learners, in the sense that with traditional tuition models, their incentives aren't necessarily aligned, right? Like lots of post-secondary institutions can just be paid up front and they'd be like, okay, it's all up to you in terms of what your employment outcomes. That's not on us. Versus if you are aligning the economic incentives, I can see the benefits for learners. That being said, in researching in advance of this interview, there are a lot of critics of income share agreements, and I'm sure you've probably seen this. And it was one of the things I wanted to do was kind of give you an opportunity to respond. In particular, one of the things that I came up is that there's a report by the Century Foundation of which they write that existing private income share agreement loans validate warnings that vendors of these products could charge high rates, including confusing terms, and could be more likely to increase the cost of education of women and people of color. So my question to you is, how would you respond to the critics of income share agreements? And then kind of as a corollary question, one of the things that seems like it comes up, a lot of it matters, is how these income share agreements are set up. So they can be set up in a way that is not beneficial of a learner. How do you set them up in a way that is inclusive and benefits learners?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's been some interesting activity in the income share agreement space where some schools have actually been selling their ISA contracts to investors. And we have a big problem with that at Juno, because we feel that, if you're making so much money from an income share agreement that an investor is actually interested in buying it because they want, this, some say even like 18% rate of return, then you're really probably taking advantage of that student. So we don't believe in selling ISA contracts. When we give an ISA to a student, that's money that we do not receive and will not receive until that student starts paying us back. The criticisms, I think, are very valid. It's a new instrument, and so it does need to be looked at very carefully. And unfortunately, like with a lot of things, if there is a bad actor who wants to create terms that take advantage of students, in a lot of states and provinces, they probably could do that. In Canada, there's always a lot more protection for these kinds of things. Juno is a registered private career college, and we have so many things that are checked. We have audited financial statements here at Juno, and our KPIs, like our placement rates, are monitored and audited by the government. So there's a lot of more protection in Canada than there might be in other countries or other jurisdictions. And at the same time in Canada, we had to get permission from the government as well to offer income share agreements. So there's a lot more hoops to go through in Canada, which once you're through those hoops, it's good because it's all about consumer protection. In terms of is it taking advantage of you said women and people of color. I was interested to see when we make this option available for students, like what happens, and it's been overwhelmingly positive. I would say there's been more demand for ISAs than we're able to fill because we fund ISAs largely out of our own profits. So there's only a certain amount that we can, offer each year, and we're still in the data collection phase. We've been offering income share agreements for about 2.5 years. And so we're still seeing what, repayment rates are like and how long does it take people to get a job and start paying back. And, we had a pandemic, unfortunately, right in the middle of this experiment as well. So that's also hurt us. But in all the like anecdotal conversations that I've had, people have been quite thrilled to have this as an option. And many people have said to me that they would not have been able to consider this career if income share agreements had not been available. So certainly I think there's bad actors out there who could do a bad job. But if you're really doing it from a student-centered point of view, I think it presents a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, it comes down to the implementation, like many things, and especially in a space that is relatively new and in some places unregulated. To your point, there's the tendency, the potential for bad actors, probably particularly in the United States, where it seems like there's a lot less kind of regulation on this. But I can agree, if somebody doesn't have any savings and they're not able to participate in a program because they don't have the tuition, an income share agreement, an ISA, can be a great path to opening up opportunities that people wouldn't otherwise be able to access. So on the kind of topic of diversity, equity, inclusion, one of the things I know that you prioritize at Juno is serving individuals from underrepresented groups in the technology and entrepreneurship ecosystem. Can you give a little more context on kind of what are some of your diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and how do you aim to foster as inclusive and equitable programming and kind of culture within your organization?
Yeah, this is really core to who we are at Juno. Our purpose is to be the school of choice for people underrepresented in the tech industry to launch and grow their careers. So it just goes to show that that's kind of what we're all about, and that's why we come to work every day. And we've been around now for almost 10 years. So we're not a startup anymore. And the culture has been very, meticulously and caringly created over many, many years. I think one of the things that I did a good job of early on was really caring a lot about the makeup of my team. So the team at Juno is very diverse. From all different backgrounds, educational backgrounds, many people who switched careers and didn't study what they do now for their job back then. It's racially diverse as well. We have many members who are LGBTQ. And so that has helped us, because when you see that that's what the team is at Juno, and you're a student and you see someone, on the team who looks like you or has a similar background as you, it automatically makes you more comfortable considering the school. So I think that was one of the first important things that we did. The other thing is that because we were connected to Ladies Learning Code, early on we had a lot of women and non-binary people who applied to come to Juno. So we already were really serving that segment really, really well. In terms of what we're doing to deepen our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So this year we actually brought on a consulting company called Empowered, and they conducted a really detailed EDI analysis for us. So tons of surveys of our students, staff, alumni. They looked at the many intersections of identities of our team, and they've developed a list of, I think, 14 or 18 recommendations for us, which will probably take us multiple years to implement all of them. There's a lot of work to be done here. We're quite proud of where we're at today. Really proud of our diversity on our team as well as our students. We were really proud of the belonging scores. People do feel like they belong at Juno. They feel like they can be themselves, generally speaking. And there were some areas where we need to improve for sure. And so using the survey as a chance to bring these things to light is really an important first step. And from here, my team has seen now the report. They've been all asked to read it by the end of the month. And then we'll be sharing the report and the findings and the recommendations with our alumni by mid-October, and then sharing it all publicly with the public probably sometime in Q4. And we'll probably redo the survey every couple of years and make sure that we're tracking our KPIs, that we're improving, because we think it's really important. And we'd like to eventually be a leader in this area. People can look to us and say, wow, that's a school that's doing this right. I think that you can say that now, but I think there's so much room to improve that we're very motivated to take that work on.
On the topic of the pandemic and the shift in work, what were both the challenges and opportunities that you experienced in shifting your boot camps from in-person to completely virtual during the pandemic?
Yeah, prior to the pandemic, we had not done anything online or virtually. So prior to the pandemic, we were exclusively an in-person school. And the biggest thing that we didn't like about that was that you sort of had to live within an hour of our office, our campus, in order to attend. And that just felt inaccessible because, what if you don't live in downtown Toronto? So that's what we didn't like about it, but there's a lot that we liked. We loved that personal connection to students. I loved always the vibe here of like the place being buzzy and filled with people, and it just felt like a world of opportunity. So when COVID hit, we did make the call to switch to being like exclusively online, and it's live online. So the instructors are there with you live over Zoom. Nothing is recorded, and you're there with your classmates at the same time. And it was, a lot of work to make the transition, but very smooth. I'm very proud of my team. I was barely involved, so that means that the team was able to just completely handle it pretty much on their own. And I've been really pleased with how the experience for students is pretty much the same. They have still the same inside jokes. They still feel the same way about Juno. They still become very bonded as a cohort. They still think their instructors are hilarious. So there's actually some things that are even better about it, including now the fact that you can live anywhere and attend Juno's programs. And we've had people attend from, the US, Europe, Asia, different places. Time zones are a challenge, so someone has to be willing to work with the time zone difference. But other than that, it's totally possible. So I think that's been exciting to be able to serve a broader audience. It's also for us been a challenge because we haven't typically been like all that great at marketing. And so it didn't matter as much when we were in person because you could only serve a small group anyway. So we didn't know about SEO. We didn't invest in SEO. That wasn't a thing that we did. Most people told their friends about us, and that's how they found out about Juno. So now that us and every single other bootcamp are all live online, marketing becomes a lot more important because you have to actually work hard to reach the students, and other schools with better marketing engines that they've built out over many, many years are better suited than we are to get those marketing messages out there. So we're definitely working on getting caught up, but I think that the real magic of Juno is probably always going to be with the in-person stuff. So we're excited to bring back in-person at whatever time it feels safe to do so. And I think the combination of, in-person stuff at Juno with some online stuff designed for accessibility will be like a really beautiful combination to go forward with.
I saw on the website Maven that you have a job search course. So what are some of the high-level tips you have for individuals who might be unemployed, or they're unemployed, but they're currently employed, but they're looking for a job, on how to get the job of their dreams?
Yeah, that's some of the most interesting content that I think we've developed at Juno over the years. Up until I think it was 2018 or maybe 2019, we didn't have a career services team at Juno. It was just me. So for the first, 5-ish years of our bootcamp program, I worked with every single bootcamp graduate on their job search. I reviewed every resume, reviewed every cover letter, coached them on how to apply for jobs, helped them with salary negotiations, like all that stuff. And I had no experience or background in that at all. So everything was kind of learned on the go. And the biggest thing that I learned was the importance of following up on your applications. Most people don't. Most people just, see that button, apply through LinkedIn, and they just click that button and they think that magically their resume is going to be selected out of a pile of 200 resumes and they're going to be called. And unfortunately, that's not really how the world works, at least not at small companies where people don't have a lot of time and there may not be an HR department and they just can't, use best practices. Even at large companies, there's a lot of bias. So I don't even know, I don't think we can say for sure that at large companies it's necessarily any better. But I've found that the most important thing someone can do in their job search is keep it organized by having a spreadsheet tracking all of their job search activity, and then ensure that they're following up on their applications, ideally until they get a response, a yes or a no. I don't think it's a problem to have to follow up several times. If I was doing a job search, that is exactly what I would do until someone replied to me, because I think it's reasonable to expect that when you apply for a job, you get told yes or no. So that's the biggest thing that we've seen success with at Juno, is that people just don't give up after one application. And we tend to encourage people to do multiple follow-ups, sharing different information in each of those follow-ups. It's easy to ignore a follow-up that sounds kind of robotic and says, hey, how come you haven't gotten back to me? No one's going to respond to that. But if you're really saying, I'm super excited about this opportunity, I'd love to hear when you might be getting back to people about interviews, I'd love to have the chance. People are human beings. And I find pretty often they're willing to get back to you and say like, hey, sorry, it's a no, or wow, thank you for your, enthusiasm and initiative. We would like to interview you. So that's been a big part of the Juno secret. And it's is something that I cover in the job search course as well.
Shifting gears a little bit back to kind of your personal kind of career trajectory. In 2011, you founded Canada Learning Code, which is a national charity that brings accessible computer science to communities across Canada, so everyone can create with technology. And for background, it was previously called Ladies Learning Code at the time, but now called Canada Learning Code. And the organization does this by partnering with educators, designing resources, and delivering learning experiences. To date, the organization has worked with over 600,000 learners across Canada. So Heather, you played a huge role in building one of the largest, if not the largest, kind of digital sort of skills training organizations in the country. Can you tell us a little bit about the early days of the organization, and in particular, what were some of the most significant challenges you had in launching this nonprofit?
Yeah, so I started learning how to code in 2009 and found it really difficult to do on my own. And so by sort of 2011, I tweeted out that there should be a group in Toronto for women who want to learn how to code. And something was different back then on Twitter because it just took off. Like everyone was sharing it. People were getting in touch with me to say they wanted to build content, they wanted to help out. I ended up finding my three co-founders, Melissa, Brianna, and Laura, through Twitter as well. Laura I knew previously, Mel I knew previously as well, but we kind of came together, and a bunch of other people as well in the early days, like being willing to help out. We organized a brainstorming session to come up with like what this organization could be, and 80 people showed up to that, like out of the blue, through a tweet basically again. So it was like a really unique experience because that just doesn't happen anymore. Like something's changed in the world or on Twitter or something like that. But back then it was really exciting. And then, I was, I think 23 at the time or something along those lines. And so it really became about creating amazing learning experiences for people. And that's what we were focused on. So we started running these coding workshops, really doing a good job to make sure that the environment was really welcoming and that people felt supported. And those early workshops were so popular. We would let people know that tickets were going on sale at 7 p.m. and they would be sold out, within a minute of tickets going on sale. And we knew that people were like clicking refresh to try and get a ticket. So it was exciting to be part of something that like so clearly had product market fit, like at the very, very beginning, probably in a bigger way than anything else I've ever worked on in my life. And then it sort of became about like how to make this a sustainable organization. So I think for the first 6 months or so, I kind of did it on the side. Then I started feeling like, okay, well, if we do 2 workshops a month or 3 workshops a month, then maybe I could take a salary of like $2,000 a month from Ladies Learning Code, and then I could quit my job, and then I could find another half salary from like some freelance jobs or something. So I did end up quitting my job after just a few months and working as a volunteer for a few months, and then starting to make sort of a half-time salary, and then eventually making a sort of crappy full-time salary. And then just growing the team from there. I mean, the team has grown. I haven't been involved day to day since 2013 because in 2012, we also created HackerU, now Juno. And by the end of 2013, they both needed their own leader. And so I chose to focus on Juno, basically. But what a fun thing to be part of as like a, 20-something-year-old kid. Like you've created this thing, people love it. They're like really feeling motivated by these workshops. These tickets are sold out. Like it was just so exciting. I have just so many fond memories of that time for sure.
On the topic of kind of your early 20s, which is when you're talking about when you launched Ladies Learning Code, if you could go back in time and you could give advice to your 22-year-old self, what would you say to her?
I'm pretty happy with how things have turned out. I attribute a lot of it to luck. So I don't think that this is like the result of hard work. I mean, some for sure, 5% or something, but I think it's like 80% plus, just right place, right time, or good luck, or the right people being around, or something along those lines. So I feel very grateful and humbled by that. I think the advice would be, I mean, certainly to invest in real estate in Toronto for sure. And then beyond that, I mean, in my 30s, I've really come around to the idea that like we're only on this planet for a short amount of time. Life is about relationships and friends and family and, my kids and these kinds of things. And that wasn't how I felt back then. Like back then I was sort of a maybe more typical, like super high achieving workaholic, like young go-getter type. And, I don't regret it or anything like that, but I probably would have made some different choices over the last, 10 years or so, if I had had a bit more of the mindset that I have today. And that might have caused a little bit less stress or a little bit less, having to fix things later or something along those lines. So I think if I could like let her know that there's more to life than work. That being said, am I here today because I worked so hard and, put in so many hours back then? Probably also yes, so it's hard. I don't actually want to change anything about my journey so far.
It's interesting. I've asked this question to probably 25 or 30 people on this podcast, and the responses are surprisingly quite similar across a lot, which is one that people often say that they wish they took sometimes more time to live in the moment. And the second is that they don't really have that many kind of regrets. So yeah, it's interesting to sort of see that those trends over time.
That's a good question. I read a lot. I read about an hour at least per day, like an hour to 2 hours per day in the evening. And I'm always reading something. In terms of what has had a big influence, I mean, lately I've been really interested in learning about Bitcoin, but not so much in the micro level, but more on the macro, like world stage kind of way. And learning about, why the gold standard was so good and why fiat money is bad and how Bitcoin could be a potential solution. So that's been definitely really interesting journey to go down. And then I also have read Good to Great like a handful of times at least. And it's just a good reminder, reading it annually or something like that, a good reminder of like what makes companies good. And it inspires me each year when I read it, however often I read it, just to get back down to like the basics. Like it's really about having the right people on the bus. It's really about having a good hedgehog concept where you can be best in the world and you're doing something that has good economic sense to it and these kinds of things. So I would say that one from a business perspective has been really great. I used to read a lot of self-help. And I do a bit less now, although I still like to read about like sleep and diet and, what's the research saying about how to live a good life as long as possible into your like late, 80s, 90s, et cetera. So I'd say that's definitely an area of interest at this stage of my life. But self-help used to be much bigger for me for sure. Like the 7 Habits, was a big one when I was in university, stuff like that.
Fantastic. Those are great books to check out. I read Good to Great probably 8 years ago, and I have it on my bookshelf over here. But I should definitely reread it because I remember it was a fantastic book, and Jim Collins' content is amazing. Heather, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. We've covered a really diverse range of topics, from the benefits of working at McDonald's at the beginning of one's career to what are income share agreements, to your experience launching one of the largest digital skills training nonprofits in the country, to now your experience running one of Canada's largest coding boot camps, and how you have dealt with the pandemic and the programming that you have around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It has been a true pleasure chatting with you this morning. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Great questions today. Appreciate it.
That's it for this week's episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our social and our email list. Subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss our next episode. If you have feedback on today's episode, tweet us at Venture4Canada. That is Venture, the number 4, Canada, or email us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. I'm Scott Stirrett, and until next time, stay safe, stay motivated, and stay grateful. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is produced by Juanita Lee Garcia and Latifa Farah. Editing and mixing also done by Latifa Farah. Erica Ormanston is our editorial assistant. Mark Wallach and Premium Beat own the copyright and publishing rights related to the song used in this podcast. The comments and opinions, recommendations, or suggestions expressed on the podcast by the guests are not liable to Venture for Canada and belong solely to each individual. Any information provided, stated by our guests and our host, is independent of Venture for Canada. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is a Venture for Canada brand, and all content is owned by Venture for Canada. If you'd like to use our content, please reach out to us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca.